Her name was Julie, and she was one day younger than me. I was pastoring in New Haven. My church was surrounded by Yale University. I used to say, we're surrounded by Yale, but we never surrendered. There were some smaller churches in that city as well, and the pastor of one of them called me one day and said, I have a family I think you might be interested in. A wife, a husband, a couple of kids. By the way, he said, the wife is sick. Well, she wasn't just sick, she was dying. In my lifetime, I've had several people tell me right to my face that they were dying, and that experience has profoundly impacted me. Julie was a researcher. She had a PhD from Boston University in sociology. She had a great job, wonderful friends, and a great family. But she also had stage 4 cancer, and it ground her down to nothing. And one day she gave up her life, her kids, her husband. And we went one evening to celebrate her life at my church in downtown New Haven. The gospel choir was in fine form. Her best friend's mother, a preacher at the big Riverside Church in New York City, gave the eulogy. And I gave the funeral sermon. I told everyone that Julie used to tell me the big C in her life wasn't cancer, the big C was Christ. Well, we came to the part of the service that drives a control freak like me a little crazy. We open it up for people to share their memories and thoughts of the loved one. And so 99% of the time, that's a wonderful experience. It's evocatively poignant. But there's that 1% that's just pure unmitigated disaster. That night, it was Julie's best friend from her small town in Oklahoma that just had to turn the attention onto herself. This has been oh so sweet, she said with the snarkiness in her voice, and oh so quaint, referring to the Christian hope of resurrection and the scriptures and the sermons. But I prefer to see Julie running through the fields of Oklahoma, not residing in some heavenly home. Well, that took the wind out of our sails for a moment. Believers and unbelievers and the rest of us in the middle somewhere looked down at our shoes for a moment, but then the gospel choir kicked in and we wrapped our loving arms around her gritty house painter husband and those 2 little kids, and we celebrated and grieved Julie's life. Is that, my friends, on Easter morning I ask you, is that what our hope of resurrection is all about? Just wish fulfillment because we can't come to terms with the loved ones that we've lost? All of us have lost someone we've loved. A few years ago, I was the guest speaker at a middle school, and afterwards some kids came up to me and asked me if I had read one of those books. You know, boy dies, goes to heaven, and comes back kind of book. Well, I hadn't, and I'm not too crazy about them actually, but I told them, I've lost a 6-year-old son. Do you think I could possibly bear the thought of never seeing him again? On this Easter morning, we're reminded of the words of St. Paul. St. Paul says that Christ was crucified, dead, and buried, but yet, he also was risen. His disciples, more than 500 people in the city of Jerusalem, scores and scores of people saw the resurrected Christ. If Christ is not raised, he says, then our faith is in vain. My friends, I come to you on this Easter morning to proclaim that there's hope in our lives. God said yes to Christ, and God said yes to Jesus' ministry, and God says yes to us on this Easter morning. I'm reminded of a book by the great psychoanalyst Rollo May, who wrote in his quest for beauty an experience that he had on Easter morning. It began in the darkness on Mount Athos in Greek at a monastery. And he celebrates the service, and it's in darkness, and the sun begins to break over the hills, and light infuses into the church, and the priest says to everyone in Greek, Christos anesti, Christ is risen. And Rollo May walked out of that service wondering, What would it mean for the world if Christ really was risen? What would it mean for you if Christ is risen? What would it mean for the people you love? I don't know too much about theology. Well, enough to get by. I've been a pastor for 35 years, but I'll leave the question of whether Christ was a resurrected physical body or whether it was a spiritual body. I'll leave that to the theologians. But I do know this. I know resurrection happens more often than we think. He was a teacher for 25 years, and just a few months shy of retirement, they canned him. They took away his job. And what's more, they gave him a retirement party that he had to go to anyway. He said it was like going to your own funeral. I lost my job, I lost my kids, I lost my profession. But then he said this, when I got home, I discovered that I had a wife and a life, and new experiences were opening up for me. It was like being dead, but there's resurrection on the other side. It was an old church in a downtown city, an historical church, and it burned to the ground after a lightning strike, completely devastated. Steeple, pews, Bibles, hymn books, organ, everything turned to ashes in a matter of hours. The next Sunday was a baptism Sunday for that congregation, and they stood in the grimy ashes of their forlorn church, and they baptized babies, because after death, there's often a resurrection. My friends, on this Resurrection Sunday, God said yes to Christ, but God says yes to us. Yes, there is hope that we will see our loved ones again. Yes, there is good in this world despite terrorism and injustice and oppression and even coronavirus. But no, hate will not win. And that is God's yes to us today. My friends, have hope, have faith, trust in God. God will say yes to you no matter where you are on this Easter Sunday. A very happy and blessed Easter to you and the people that you love.